Aloha, and welcome to our September session of the Human Rights Ability Campus Community Dialogue. Of course, today is September 11th, and it's actually the 14th year in a row that we've had events around education focusing on human rights and an alternative future. We've always focused on September 11th for hope, not hatred, freedom, not fear, and making sure that we look at a dialogue that focuses on changing the world in a positive way. And that's always the things that we focus on in the sanctity of all human life. What we're looking at this session, of course, is a group that has had many different human rights violations throughout time. We're focusing on indigenous peoples' rights. And what we'll be focusing on, since we're so close to September 13th, is the anniversary of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was adopted September 13, 2007. It was very important because indigenous peoples had gone to the UN lobbying and doing advocacy work to make sure that their rights were recognized and respected. And so what we're going to focus on today is we're going to do a couple of things. The first thing we'll look at is a short film that was made looking at Indigenous Summer in Geneva. And it will look at indigenous peoples going to the United Nations to raise the issues. At that time, there was only the UN Working Group on Indigenous Populations. We actually start looking at an issue close to home here in Hawaii. It actually features footage from Sand Island. But what happened at the time was Professor Hanani K. Trask was one of the few Kanaka Maoli who would go to the UN to share the story of what was going on, but also to negotiate and do advocacy work, to negotiate with other indigenous peoples throughout Oceania, but then also to be able to put the issues forward through the institutions of the United Nations. And we're fortunate today to have Piret Peru with us. Piret has actually worked, she's a geographer and a historian who was also part of the founding of DOSIP and also worked, though, with the Innu in Montreal in Canada, but also with the Yanomami. She's been working with the indigenous peoples since they've been arriving at the United Nations. We'll be able to share her experience and her story of decades of work with indigenous peoples from all of the 7 indigenous regions. We'll also then have a speaker after that that will look at the situation in Ryukyu, in Okinawa. We'll have Shoko Oshiro to be able to share. But we'll also have another film that was made by indigenous peoples, indigenous youth, when they came together at a symposium commemorating the anniversary of indigenous peoples coming to the United Nations, actually last September as well. So it's a very full show. If there's time, we'll also share about the recent meeting at the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, CERD, and the results of that important review at the United Nations. So we'd like to thank everyone for coming and participating. The first part we'll show is just a short 10 minutes, but it's looking at what was going on at Sand Island not so long ago, and both examples of direct action and diplomacy utilized by indigenous peoples.
Geneva is a Mapuche Indian who started working with us a few years ago, and we were able to have a kind of mutual protection, and that also forces the UN to look at us a little more seriously, to look at the problem, especially in the Americas, in Hawaii, Australia, Oceania, more seriously.
There's an island by the sea, beautiful Sand Island.
During the 70s, over 100 homeless native Hawaiian families took refuge on this island in the middle of the port of Honolulu, which had served as a public garbage dump. They cleaned it up and resumed their traditional way of life, closely linked to the ocean.
Beautiful Sand Island, beautiful Sand Island. In the midst of all these garbage, Mother Nature made my home by the shores of Sand Island.
If human rights are to mean anything other than rhetoric, and if they are to be applied to anyone other than those already enjoying them, They must first be experienced by indigenous people who are the prior inhabitants of the continents and islands of this world. Most basic among these rights are those of self-determination, that is, rights to live on and control our lands and to pass on our culture to future generations. As peoples rather than populations, we also have international rights as nations to take our place among the society of nations.
Beautiful Sand Island.
In the beginning of the 80s, 180 acres of the island were reclaimed by the state of Hawaii for industrial and recreational development. This meant the eviction, without any compensation, of the entire community.
Beautiful Sand Island. Beautiful Sand Island.
Too much, man. This is time either we do it, well, forget it. Forget about the Hawaiians. What you guys, these guys try to do what with us? We're not Indians. We're Hawaiian people, natives. This is our life.
The response to this among our people recently, the last 10 years or so, has been to resist it, to resist tourism, to resist the American military. And the two forms of resistance are to occupy the land, which we have done regarding the American military's bombing of one of our islands, one of our sacred islands. And the other one is to do political organizing in the communities. And an extension of political organizing is to do networking throughout the Pacific. So our first international outreach is in the South Pacific to the Tahitians and their independence movement, because they want to be independent from France, to the Kanaks in New Caledonia because they want to be independent of France, to the Australian Aborigines, to the Micronesians who are negotiating with the United States to be independent. Our second international networking is here, is to come to someplace like Geneva or to go to the United States, to the mainland and link up with American Indians, because although we are culturally different, we're still indigenous people and we have the same colonizing power, which is America.
June 3rd, 1985, on the beach of Waimanalo.
You feed, Charlie, you feed any place. One touch, good, yeah, that's all.
That they may understand, that they may become more patient,
Carefully.
that they may love the people who stand on their rights. Be with our people, O Lord, wherever they are in Hawaii or elsewhere, that somehow in their hearts they may know that they are Hawaiians and be proud that they are Hawaiians. So be with us, O Lord, as we stand firm on this aina. Makainoa ka makua, ki keiki, a me ka uhani he molele.
The community decided to resist eviction from their ancestral homelands, now a public beach area.
All indigenous people are caught in an East-West conflict. The Soviet Union and Eastern Europe say that they're more sympathetic, but they have indigenous people too. They mistreat other indigenous people. The West gives humanitarian aid, so-called, but they prevent all kinds of tribal, collective living arrangements by taking the land, by using the land. So both we understand as indigenous people that we are caught in this struggle.
The spirit is on that check. Your families will be cursed.
Therefore, the rest of the world can benefit from what indigenous people do and say, and from our own culture. The rest of the world doesn't understand that, and we know that. They're used to consuming their environment, wasting their environment, polluting their environment. But all indigenous people that I've talked to here understand what Hawaiians call aloha aina, which means the love of the land. That's our cultural relationship to the land. It expresses our philosophical and economic relationship to the land. All indigenous people that I've met have that relationship. And so we have something to teach the rest of the world, which is that you can live in harmony with your relations, whether they are animals or plants or the waters of the world. And so we have something to give to the rest of the world. It's not just that we come here to complain. We come here to say to the rest of the world, what you are doing is insane. You will all blow yourselves up. You will end the beautiful cultures that the world has to offer. And we have an alternative way of living.
So that was our first film, just to bring Indigenous rights home. Even though it's significant around the world, that September 13th, 2007 anniversary of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we all know that it's really the implementation phase that's important. And in this case, Articles 21, 23, but also Article 26, that Indigenous peoples have the right to lands, territories, and resources. And so we'll have many important issues to look at, considering land rights, considering sustainable development, especially as that's going on now at the United Nations in the post-2015 agenda. What I wanted to do now, though, is introduce Pirette to be able to share a little bit about her rich experience with Indigenous peoples for many decades. And then when Pirette is finished, we will then show another short clip from a brand new movie. It'll be a premiere in Hawaii called Bridge to the Future. And it was based on a symposium last year in September, bringing together the Indigenous peoples who arrived in Geneva in '77 and also in 1981 on the Right to Land Conference. So we're definitely glad to have Pirette with us, as well as Shoko, because one of the things we try to do with our Human Rights Campus Community Sustainable Dialogue is to bring different speakers and to highlight different issues that happen at the global level that are important to us here at the grassroots level, and to work with a coalition of political science departments across the university, as well as other programs, and the NGOs that work on these important issues, such as the United Nations Association. Piret, merci beaucoup. Thank you for coming today.
Merci, mahalo, and aloha, bonjour. I am really very happy to be here today. It's so important for me to share the experience I could have. I was so lucky and so honored to have with indigenous peoples at the United Nations. And now I am a little bit retired, so I am very happy to have young people listening about the experience of an old woman. I also thank Joshua Cooper for bringing me here and making me visit Maui.
She got to go to Maui for a couple of days.
And okay, so as we showed, no, first I should say that DOCIP means Indigenous Peoples Center for Documentation, Research and Information. It's not a documentation center for or on indigenous peoples, it's their documentation center. They asked us when there was the first conference in 1977 at the United Nations in Geneva. For the first time in the United Nations, they were speaking about indigenous peoples. They asked us to collect their memory, written memory, and all the documents they would like to produce and to show to the United Nations, and also to inform them on the UN processes, which can be rather complicated, especially at that time when we had no internet. They also asked us to open a space where they could work when they come at the UN. We can imagine that at the United Nations, which in fact should be named United States of the world, that the states, the government, they have all the means. Indigenous peoples and NGOs have quite no means, and especially indigenous peoples. So we try to correct this imbalance, this disequilibrium a little bit. Of course, we cannot go reach as much, but indigenous peoples are very keen in doing a lot with few means. So we can bring them logistical support when they come in Geneva so that they are not lost. We can bring them translations and interpretation of their caucuses, of their informal meetings, which are for me maybe as important as the official conferences of the United Nations, because they can see that they have the same problems all around the world. They have time to discuss their strategies, to exchange information, to know themselves, and as how Nani said, all indigenous people at the United Nations understand what means aloha aina. So this part of informal is also very important. We also give training. We sometimes hire Josh for making a training on human rights documentation, transfer capacity for the French African indigenous peoples who are maybe those who need most. And that's our work. We try to be as impartial as possible. We don't take part because we respect the self-determination of indigenous peoples. And I think that if we would not, indigenous peoples would tell us, oh, stop it. We don't want that non-indigenous interfere in our work. And we understand that. I would say that it would be the same if indigenous people come and tell me, oh, in Switzerland you should do like that and like that. I would say, well, why does he tell me that? You know, I think everybody has right to their self-determination to decide collectively and individually what they want, and not only what they want, but what suits to their culture, to their people, to their situation, and that's why we respect that. Also, we work with everybody, every indigenous people, person, delegate, because we cannot say, oh, this is better or not. So that's not our business. It's theirs. I think it's a political way of supporting self-determination in a very concretely way. Now, what you saw on Hawaii, we also shown it not only because it was on Hawaii, but also because it shows you that indigenous peoples come at the United Nations when they are not heard in their country. They not come in Geneva or in New York for their pleasure. I met many indigenous delegates. We were not very well. They had health problems with our food and so on and so on. So they don't come for their pleasure. They come because they are not listened to in their own country, be it in the United States, be it in Africa, be it in Asia, be it in the Arctic. Also in Europe, we have our problems with the Sami, or in Scandinavia with the Sami, with the Inuit, in Russia. Also we have indigenous peoples in Australia, in New Zealand. So they come because they were not heard in their country, and they try to be heard at the international level. I think this must be absolutely emphasized. And they have been heard. They have been heard, and this is the good news, is that their work was not unuseful. It has been very useful, at least at an international level. What they did is incredible. They opened doors that no major human rights NGO never did. Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, all these big NGO always respected the rules. It's not that the indigenous people did not respect the UN rules, but they went beyond, because they said, we are nations. We are not non-governmental. We are nations and we are peoples, and they have to struggle to be considered as peoples, because the human rights instruments, particularly the Covenant, Civil and Political Covenant, and Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Covenant, recognize that all people in the world have the right to self-determination, which does not mean automatically independence. You know, there are a lot of a broad range of possibilities of agreements. It's just sometimes the states who do not understand that, you know. In Switzerland, we are very decentralized. Geneva is a state, and we have 23 states, and we are very autonomous. And we just decided to put us together for several things. So this is one example, but you have many other types of confederation, the arrangement, you know. So all peoples have the rights of self-determination, and so the indigenous people said, why not us? Because the states wanted to deny them this right. They succeeded. They had a working group on indigenous peoples in 81 and 82, since 82. They then had the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. They began it in 1984. So it was 23 years were necessary for drafting the declaration. Maybe it's a long time, but I believe a lot in long time, in long term, you know. We are in a time where everything is quick, but does not last. But if we want to do something sustainable, times is necessary, and it is especially a democratic time. If you want to consult, if you want to work with everybody, to integrate everybody, you have to discuss, and it takes time. It takes a lot of time, and it takes to speak in several languages, not only in English. I am a French speaker, so I know what it means not to have the documentation in our language, you know. We have to understand all that. It takes time, and it, of course, takes a lot of time for indigenous peoples coming from the forest or from the Arctic. So probably, I think so, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is the most democratic instrument, at least human rights instrument, which has never been done in the United Nations. Because indigenous peoples, thousands of indigenous peoples delegates participated, and our work was with those SIP to secure their communication with their bases, with their communities, with their organizations, even when there was no email, only fax, you know. But we did it because so that they could refer to their capital, as say the diplomats. They could do the same. What else did they succeed? They succeed to have the permanent forum on indigenous issues, which is now in New York. So they can be in New York and in Geneva. I think it's good. Geneva is human rights. It's a little bit the column vertebral, I do say that, of the rights of indigenous peoples. with also something else I should not forget.
The backbone vertebrae.
The backbone, yes. But I should not forget another part which is very important is also decolonization process. I know it less because it's not my domain, but I think the two backbones are human rights and decolonization process. This is one thing. And in New York, you have all range of rights, all issues which are dealt with. Health, education, land, all the international organizations having programs with indigenous people. They developed many programs since the beginning of the Permanent Forum in 2002. So it's good to have both parts. They also succeeded to have the special rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples, to whom indigenous peoples can address their complaints, address the situation, the human rights situation in their countries, and the special rapporteur many times is doing visits and he makes reports and try to have them passed at the Human Rights Council, which is in Geneva. And finally, you have the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples, who make studies on how to implement the declaration. The main concept for the implementation of the declaration is the free, prior, informed consent. And this, I don't understand why the state are doing so much stories about this, because it's just normal. If you put a dam, want to explore a mine, if you want to destroy a building in your part of your city where you live, if you want to put a bridge on the Lake of Geneva, we have this discussion in Geneva, it's normal that the people concerned be consulted and having all the information necessary, knowing the impact, social, cultural, environmental impact. It's normal that we have time to discuss that, and of course it's normal that this information, we have it before that works are beginning, and of course it's normal too that we are not threatened if we are opposing. So for me, it's something so normal. I don't understand why they don't accept that. Now we have to see how to implement it, because, of course, when it is only among English-speaking people or French-speaking people, it's not a problem. But if you have to speak another language, you are with another culture. So the responsible for these works, big works, for example, they should go to the community, they should speak with the communities, explaining in a clear way, in a direct way. They should listen to the community, maybe not only the chiefs, maybe not only the delegates, also the women, for example. Also because women are very good for concretizing things, to put them in practice, into practice. I had a lot of pleasure to work with indigenous women, I must say. We understand each other very well because they are concrete. They go like that, they go. They don't make a lot of speech. So, so it's always a pleasure to work with them, and I think it's their turn to come always more at the UN, but especially to work now on the ground, which is what many of them are already doing, because they will be very helpful for the implementation of the declaration. This is maybe the last thing I would like to incentivate and to emphasize, is that now the declaration must be implemented. And of course, it's not the states who will implement it. They will do everything they can to prevent it to be implemented. So it's the people themselves who have to do it. The communities, also the communities, don't wait from your leader. They cannot do everything. When they come in Geneva, when they're in New York, they travel all over the world. They often have no secretariat. They cannot do everything. The communities have now to take this instrument in their hands and to practice it and involve the indigenous women, because they will be very helpful. So this is one thing I want to emphasize. And the second is also that indigenous people at the UN really many things. You understand me, I hope.
Have reached success in many spheres.
Yeah, and they didn't ask for the state to do the job. They did it by themselves. I think they are a very good example, not only for you indigenous, if there are, I hope there are Hawaiian indigenous listening to us, not only for you, but also for all youth, all young people. Do it. try it, experiment, take the lessons from what you did, and do it again. Better if it is possible. So thank you so much.
Mahalo, Peret. Merci beaucoup. What we do think is really important is one, just to look at the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. These are two copies, one from the Sami Institute and then one produced by the First Nations in Canada. But it's an example of popularizing what the rights are. And so it is true, the Indigenous peoples did show up, as you can see in the video that will come up next.
Just one.
It is important that you'll be able to then understand and look at what Indigenous peoples have accomplished in their 3 decades at the UN. But it really is a great example of people power and what different groups should do if they're interested in making a difference, taking a cause from the grassroots level, bringing it to the global level, but then more importantly, taking those positive results based on advocacy to the local and national level. So,
just one thing.
Yes, Peter.
If I just can tell you that this film has been done in 4 days. We organized a symposium with elders, with those who came in 77 and 81 first, and with youth of the different part of the world who were trained in video and interview their elders. And this is the beginning of an oral tradition memory project. But I just wanted to give the context. It's not a perfect, but they did a real fantastic job, I think.
Yes. It's an amazing example of elder and youth project of working together. I see a lot of movement in Hilo. I just want to make sure everything's okay. Is everything all right there? You can just hit your mic if there's anything you wanted to share real quick.
Yeah, we were just turning the lights on because while we were watching, we turned the lights off. Thank you.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. I didn't want to, it's a problem about going between the islands. We just wanted to make sure if something was wrong or everything, but great. So if it's okay, we'll show part of that film called Bridge to the Future. And we will feature that for a couple of minutes. After that concludes, then I'll introduce Shoko Oshiro, who will talk to us about a case study example of Ryukyu, Okinawa. And then we'll have questions afterwards, if that's okay with everyone. I see West Oahu there and a couple of other campuses. So just to confirm, that'll be the format that will continue, and it's good to see more people joining us. So here's the film. The picture there you see is Deskahe. He was a chief of the Haudenosaunee representing the Cayuga Nation.
These people from around the world have historically struggled for the recognition of their rights and the protection of their ancestral territories upon which they depend for their cultural, spiritual, and physical well-being. The continuous struggle and the urge of being recognized as peoples and nations brought Indigenous peoples representatives together for the first time at the United Nations in Geneva in 1977. This year marked an inflection point for the contemporary history of Indigenous peoples worldwide. It was followed by the 1981 Conference on Indigenous Peoples and the Land. The advocacy through the past 37 years has led to major developments such as the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007. In 2013, a historical symposium was organized at the UN in Geneva on a proposal from historian Carlos Mamani of the Aymara people. It gathered first delegations at the 1977 and 1981 conferences. 7 indigenous youth from different regions of the world, Alanke, Judy, Sharni, Jackie, Morgan, Weyane, and Heidi, were trained in filming and in charge of collecting the oral memory of the first delegates. The indigenous youth got to know history firsthand, discussed it, analyzed it, and proposed this video as a result of their collaborative work.
Una palabra que caracteriza al movimiento indígena es la identidad.
Strong.
Awesome.
Un arcoíris.
Fuerte. Lucha.
Limitless. That is the promise of having youth, is that you have a limitless possibility and potential going forward into the future. The only way it can become limited is what I was saying before about closed minds. We cut off our own future. And in indigenous law, it is a crime. The most major crime you can commit under indigenous law is to threaten future.
The wisdom of indigenous peoples and our knowledge is not looking back to the past. It is actually wisdom that is required for addressing the serious problem in contemporary society. Modern societies have broken the relationship with the earth. And the continuity of this intergenerational relationship with our lands and with the earth has to be awakened and engendered in all of society.
The second very important thing is law, is the concept that choice is sacred. And so that choice is always available. And so we will have a limitless future if we honor that choice is sacred and we don't do anything that will threaten future. Then we're going to have an incredible future.
En 1977 venimos a una toma de la ciudad de Ginebra a nivel pacífico, a nivel intelectual, a nivel moral. Venimos a sembrar dos semillas muy grandes. El uno de una semilla era el principio de la libre determinación de los pueblos indígenas del mundo. Y la segunda semilla era el reconocimiento de los pueblos indígenas. Sembramos en esta tierra en las Naciones Unidas y retornamos.
We didn't start in 77 by any means. It became international there, and at the same time that Alcatraz was occupied, there were different occupations of a similar nature that were going on all around the country. And then all around the world and all around the Americas, you know, it just started spreading. And so even as early as 77, it was just another culmination of a different level of movement. We had done, as far as the United States goes, we have had pretty much exhausted our options. And so the next move was to go international.
La presencia nuestra maravilló a la sociedad europea, maravilló a la sociedad suiza, a la ciudad de Ginebra, ¿no? Nuestra presencia con los penachos ceremoniales de los hermanos de Canadá y de Estados Unidos, los trajes de los shuar de Ecuador, de la Amazonía, las flautas, los tambores, las pipas sagradas, en fin, nuestra presencia conmovió al mundo, desconcertó y maravilló a la sociedad europea. se creó un ambiente de mucha expectación.
In June of 1977 was the first Inuit Circumpolar Conference that brought together the Inuit of Alaska, Canada, and Greenland. But because of the Cold War, the Russians were absent. But we left an empty seat for them, and eventually they joined us. That was a significant development, again, going on simultaneously with the organizing and preparation of the 1977 conference here. We had our own business in the Arctic.
I came from Australia in 81 to this conference in July, and on my way I stopped off in Canada at Ottawa and met up with the National Indian Brotherhood. And when I got on the plane to come to Geneva, my two colleagues, they told me that the Australian government no longer wanted us to present the papers that we'd agreed to in Canberra, and that I was to come back and not go on to Geneva. And then the history was that I told the National Indian Brotherhood of this problem, and then they said, no, we guarantee that you'll get there and we'll let everybody know that you've got a problem. When I did arrive in Geneva, I met at the airport by Don Augustus William Diaz, and he met me there as one of the key players in the Human Rights Commission at the time. He just said to me, I'm here to pick you up and to give you a safe passage to the UN because there's 6 guys standing around the wall here who are ready to arrest you and put you on another plane and send you back to Australia.
Augusto is, we can't probably give enough credit for what he's done for indigenous people to introduce that concept when we didn't even want to be recognized by the countries where we live. He subtly, he kind of like a submarine, he floated beneath the surface of the UN. But he carried a powerful arsenal of the truth. He carried a powerful arsenal of documentation of who we were as indigenous people. So I want to say thank you, Augusto Pilama Apolo. The reception we got from the people of Switzerland was amazing. Tremendous welcome, and their kindness and their support and their welcoming made those issues at the airport seem very small.
Mon message, c'est de vous dire que si en 1977 vous avez bien été accueillis et que durant toutes ces années vous avez continué à être bien accueillis à Genève, Genève reste et restera ce qu'avait promis mon prédécesseur Claude Quetterer, un espace ouvert, un espace d'accueil pour les organisations non gouvernementales, les peuples autochtones qui défendent leurs droits.
The memories coming back, at least to that first meeting, my first time, is being confused and tired, exhausted, not getting any sleep, and yet knowing all the time I was part of a historic moment and very privileged to be a part of it. The accomplishment of Native people as a collective had never been in the UN before, and had an opportunity to tell the story of genocide in the Americas. It just seemed like there's no way to go back, that it opened doors, that you had to keep them open. People who weren't there, who heard about it, thought, well, they went, they opened the doors, and now the UN will do something. You know, it's that kind of dependency, colonial dependency attitude, that this powerful thing will, you know, they will just automatically know, and they'll change everything, they'll create a treaty, they'll grant independence, you know. So there were some disappointments because it didn't happen quickly. And looking back, that it from 77 to 2007, 30 years it took to get the declaration. And as you get to know the UN better, it's a phenomenally short time for something so controversial and completely starting from scratch. Nothing existing that, we had to create institutions that didn't exist before, the working group and all. It seems phenomenal, but in the process at the time, it seemed very slow motion.
Well, 38 years later, we're still here. So do we have justice? I asked. Do we have respect? Do we have recognition of indigenous peoples? Just to frame the work in terms of the challenges we have facing us going into the future. That for us, the goal is self-determination as evidenced by and in our treaties.
Self-determination means the right you have to choose for yourself as indigenous people that goes to the next level, whether it's protection of our resources, whether it's discrimination and racism, whether it's deciding to put our own regulations in place in regard to the use of our lands, the right to our own economic self-sufficiency, our economic sustainability. These are all rights that come under the right to self-determination. And so this is what the Declaration says, we have that right.
And so that's really just a great snapshot of this new documentary made by Indigenous youth by consulting and talking with the elders who paved the path for all Indigenous peoples at the United Nations. And Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz, who is in the video, just came to Hawaii the week after she was there and reflected about the work. And I think the points that Roxanne made, as well as Piret, talks about what's possible and what Indigenous peoples have been able to accomplish by coming to the UN, by speaking for themselves, but more importantly, looking at international law and looking at the international organizations and then coordinating campaigns to make sure that it works for them to guarantee that they have rights that are recognized from the UN Charter, as well as in the UN human rights mechanisms, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So all of this is absolutely crucial and important to look at and to understand, to see what's possible. What's also important, and what we'll also look at for sure in our work, is to be able to see what Indigenous peoples have accomplished, but we'll also look at case studies and examples of what Indigenous peoples are still facing around the world. I think I'll hand it to Piret just for a couple of short comments to share after reflecting upon that movie, and then we'll have Shoko Oshiro to be able to share with us the case study about Okinawa, Ryukyu, and then we'd like to open up to questions. So anybody that has a question or a comment about this one important aspect of the UN, we think that will be great. And what is really important is we want to start off the semester looking at Indigenous rights, since there'll also be a World Conference on Indigenous Peoples that will take place on September 22nd and 23rd. And another important point that was brought up by Haunani K. Trask also is Indigenous peoples didn't come to complain only, but also to create. And more importantly, to also share their Indigenous wisdom. And we can see that as well with the UN Climate Change Summit. The UN Climate Change Summit will take place on the 23rd of September. So there's a lot of activities happening at the UN this month. We wanted to share all those with you. And then next month, we'll also talk about all the different activities and events and give a recap of what was accomplished at the UN World Conference on Indigenous People, as well as the UN Climate Change Summit. We also wanted to congratulate the UN Hilo chapter for their meeting on September 6th. We heard that you had over 50 people, so that's great, and it's good to see the message of what many people study in political science rippling out throughout the community. So, Piret?
Yes, just first to tell you that the two films we showed extracts are on YouTube. You have Indian Summer in Geneva on YouTube, and you also have the complete film of the youth bridge to the future, and you put indigenous because you are different bridge to the future. So you can see it completely. Yes, what indigenous peoples like to say, and they are right, is that developing the process of the recognition of their rights. You should know maybe that in 1970, 1980, nobody was speaking about indigenous peoples. There were no document. They were not on the map of the world. They were inexistent, in fact, at international level and often at national level too, in fact. They did not show, they could not show them as they were because they were discriminated. So this is the big process, the big path they had at the UN, and in doing this path, they also developed new things for the UN. For example, they introduced or they emphasized collective rights. They introduced the quest for protection of the environment. You cannot speak of indigenous people rights without speaking of their rights, relationship to land and to the environment. They also brought the spirituality and also the concerns of women, and the women brought the concern of the youth, of the kids. So they brought a lot of things at the United Nations. And maybe one small thing, sorry, you saw a very old man from Guatemala whose name is Augusto. He personified also what the dominant society can do. I belong to the dominant society, but I also can do a lot. And we have to have this relationship of respect, and also only 1 or 2 or 3% at the UN allowed indigenous people, show the indigenous people the way where to go. So in the administration, I believe also that the officers of the administrations, locally, nationally, they can do also a lot.
Okay.
Oh.
Hello. I have. Thank you. Hello. My name is Shoko Oshiro from Okinawa, and currently I'm studying in Osaka. Today, I would like to talk about unconscious colonialism and indigenous people. And the case study is Okinawa. Why I'm going to talk about this topic because first of all, Okinawa is not indigenous. Okinawans are indigenous people in Japan, but Japanese people doesn't, or they don't want to recognize Okinawan people as indigenous, because if they recognize us, they start thinking that they will lose their territory, which is this is a map. We are locating between Taiwan and Japan and China, and Japan really wants to keep our land for economic reason or defense reason. Hi. Then I was thinking why Japanese people doesn't want to recognize us as indigenous people. And maybe, yeah, I gave you the reason, but why it's still continuing the colonialism? If I talk to them about you're still doing colonizing us, they will say the colonialism is the past thing, not ongoing things. So I was thinking, how can they say that? It's really interesting topic for me to think about that. Then I found this unconscious colonialism. I mean, this is, set up by Koya Nomura, who actually pointed out it seems Japanese are not aware they continue to colonize Okinawa. Although Okinawa is responsible for the security of Japan, he said this one in 2005, and he exposed that violent reality of the Japanese in Okinawa. Especially, he's criticizing liberal group in Japan. He also used to, criticize Japanese government, also U.S. government as well. But now he's looking at the liberal people because we used to think they're our partner, but our situation is not changed. So we started need to think about liberal groups in Japan as well. And I was thinking, what is the problem? Because they used to our partner, it's still partner as well. And then I was picking up their discourse, like Japan is dependent country of the US. They used to say this discourse. And do you know what this discourse create? That we have common enemy. I mean, they're thinking, you know, Japanese government used to follow the US government policy, like self-defense forces established because US government told Japanese government to do it. Then actually, this is not Japanese people wanted, you know, to have defense forces after World War II. They actually wanted to change around that time. So they don't like this kind of government attitude, and then because they don't have independent policy. So then they started, I mean, liberal group in Japan, they started criticize the US government, Japanese government, and conservative groups in Japan. So these groups are, you know, Okinawa is also criticizing them. So it became unite and common enemies. But since we unite and working together, and what's happening is that this liberal group, they have forgotten that they actually depend on defense system in Okinawa as well. Not only other conservative group, they also depend on Okinawa as well. There's one more reason that when they think the U.S. military base in Okinawa as a matter of the policy, I mean government's work, you know, when you started thinking that process, the people Japanese, they're feeling that they are not discriminate any people. It's government's work. It's not our work. They will think that way. So this is quite interesting situation in Japan, maybe other places as well. So yeah, this is really interesting situation. But this, you know, then what happened to us between Okinawa and Japanese liberal groups is, you know, they trying to support us. Yeah, but yeah, then they used to say we are working for Okinawans who should not live in dangerous conditions. But only Okinawan can change Japanese government, as that is not our mission. This is actually good because we know that we need to change the government, but the thing is, they are thinking they do not try to change the government. Only Okinawan has to do it, not Japanese people's, you know, work. This is actually is not united or working together. They just put us, you know, separate. You have to do whatever you need to do. This is, I don't know, this is quite, do you call it solidarity or whatever? Then I was thinking a different case. It's a recent case. Do you know, there is now the issue is U.S. air station relocation issues. This is happening in 2010. I mean, the government declared that we are going to start the relocation inside Japan, not Okinawa. But what happened is no prefecture or no city or no village said the Japanese did not announce to accept the military base to share Okinawan's issue. Also, dispatch Osprey. This is interesting. Association of Kyushu City Mayors did not accept sharing the dispatch the Osprey burdens. That's because it's dangerous, which means Okinawa, this kind of dangerous, only Okinawa has to have it, not just for the Japanese. Yeah, we felt that way. So Japanese people still discriminating us, and also they're keeping separate that the military issues should not come to the Japanese land. Only Okinawan land, has problem. I'm sorry, I'm going to the conclusions. If you don't understand, please ask me again. This U.S. military-based issues, which is our indigenous people's land, is not only government policy issues, and also is Japanese people's issues. Like I told, this is Hatoyama regime in 2010 is this Futenma relocation issue. Japanese people actually selected government who tried to relocate Futenma Air Base to outside of Okinawa. Yeah, he tried to do it, but at that time, no liberal group in Japan support his opinion, his policy. It didn't spread all over the world, all over the Japan. It just became, discourse, or he tried, but he couldn't do it because it's dangerous. It became, really sad situation for us, but we're still trying to do it, to relocate, not relocate to Okinawa. It should go to mainland of Japan. And also, this liberal group keep forgetting that why is Okinawa responsible for the security of Japan more than 60 decades? This is the one. They have to think about that. Of course, other people, conservative group in the Japanese government also need to think this too, but the things is liberal group in Japan keep forgetting this. Because they're trying to be nice to the people, which is, it's good to be nice, but what they have done to Okinawa is discrimination, but indirect way. So they haven't realized this, what they are doing. So I'm going to suggest that, I don't know this is correct English or not, incorrect sharing, which means they have to realize that they are doing discriminating Okinawans. They have to, liberal group has to realize what they're doing, and Okinawan also should keep asking to this liberal group. Okinawan used to say that please support to Okinawa movement, like we are begging to Japanese to get their support. Okinawa have to stop that kind of behavior to the Japanese. Otherwise, we can make 50-50 relationship. So I think, I don't know other place, but Okinawa and the Japanese has to do it, this incorrect sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Joko. What is important and what we're looking at today then is, we of course started with the case study of the Pacific, looking here at Hawaii and Sand Island and the example of Kanakamo'oli and their own homeland, trying to guarantee the right to land and housing. And then this other example was the important example of indigenous peoples coming together as a collective and realizing that they face common challenges, and how Nani K. Trask also talked about how indigenous peoples are also caught in the Cold War, and so was the United Nations. And then, of course, in 1989, with the fall of the wall, there really was an explosion of civil society, of people's movements coming together and being able to say, now the UN isn't caught in this Cold War, it's not frozen, it's thawing. And of course, the indigenous peoples really were saying that the UN's supposed to ever meet its goals. It should, of course, have to also look at the decolonization point that Piret brought up, and that all peoples have a right of self-determination as stated in the UN Charter. And your example of Ryukyu is quite important because it also is part of a conflict as well, that Ryukyu, of course, is seen as a buffer in some ways to the other countries, but then also with Japan to be able to put military bases there, it would rather have them there from the United States than on their land. And so, of course, that's a problem. And then, of course, your issue there of also solidarity. When indigenous peoples have come together, as Piret came and shared, they always had the common struggle. And of course, in your example, you're trying to get a settler society to recognize its role and then to, more importantly, be a genuine ally, to be more of how Dosip has served and other people have worked together in a true partnership, doing what is asked, as opposed to saying, oh, it's your job and you do this, and then not taking responsibility maybe in Japan. So we do know and we see that, of course, it's very complex. We have the example here now from the Pacific with Hawaii, but also in Asia there with Okinawa. And of course, there's the role of the global issues that are impacting with the military bases and what happens there. So I know one of the most important issues coming up in the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples is a specific paragraph on demilitarization. And hopefully the language from that will be helpful in your campaigns in Ryukyu, Okinawa. With the time we have left, we'd like to open it up to anyone on any other sites to be able to ask a question or make a comment. And we'll go from there. Is there anyone in Hilo or UH? I see West Oahu there as well. You just have to touch the microphone.
Hi.
And then you'll be able to. There you go.
This is Ruth Robison. Thank you very much for the program today. I just wanted to note that unfortunately we have no indigenous people here at our site. And if we had enough notice about the meetings, I know that there are people on this campus, both faculty and students, who would like to be here and fill the room so that we could get this great information out to the indigenous people of this campus. So could you please let us know about future programs for the indigenous issues?
Thank you, Hilo. What we will be doing is we're recording this, so we will upload it, and you'll be able to share it with the members of UNA and also with the different departments. We had gotten it to the different departments relating and are teaching Hawaiian studies here on Oahu, as well as to your department in Hilo as well. But we'll keep trying to get the word out. We'll also come up with a calendar for the rest of the year. We already can tell you and announce that November 25th, we'll be having the focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. UN Sustainable Development Goals, looking at the post-2015 development agenda. So that will definitely be one issue. And we also have another one that I believe will be right after the election in November as well. And we're working on a final date for October to make sure that we're able to have the speakers who are coming in, such as this great example where we're able to have a speaker from Switzerland and one as well from Okinawa, Ryukyu. But we definitely always aim every month to try to improve. And we're also realizing, you know, a lot of people now look at everything online and watch it at their own convenience. So we're doing our best to transition with the Human Rights Sustainability Campus Community Dialogue to then upload them and be able to allow people to access them at their own time. And we'll be looking at different websites that can host that.
So could you send us the link about how to access this program once you upload it?
Yes, I'm sitting next to Chris, and Chris and I are working on improving a couple of different websites to be able to get that word out So we will definitely get that to you. Are there any other questions from
Thank you.
West Oahu? I think you just hit the button, but it looks like a technician will help you real quick.
Oh, I was wondering about the definition of indigenous, in particular the state of Sabah, I believe, in Malaysia. There's so many Filipinos there, and I think if they are coached, they might declare themselves indigenous. And I was wondering if the UN will honor that.
Anybody want to answer that one? Okay. So it's a good question. There's actually indigenous peoples, of course, in Malaysia already. And the indigenous peoples, of course, consider themselves the sons of the soil. That's the term in their own indigenous language. And of course, in Sarawak, in Borneo, there's many places where indigenous peoples are living and working with many of the similar issues. I was there a couple of years ago, and the main issue there was a new dam that they were constructing and the impacts it would have by flooding the indigenous homelands. So the indigenous peoples there are very active to try to protect their land, to make sure that their language is secured. One of the unique abilities is for indigenous peoples to connect with what's popular. So one colleague of mine is a young indigenous youth from Malaysia. He's using hip-hop, but doing hip-hop in his own indigenous language to teach about self-determination, to teach about free, prior, and informed consent, to teach about land rights and the rich culture that his people are and have. So he uses hip-hop, though, to connect with the young people, to share. So there's still a group there. In the Philippines, there's many indigenous people. There's the new special rapporteur on indigenous peoples is Vicky Tali Corpus. She has a group called Tebteba that's based in Baguio. And there's many indigenous peoples there that have been working against a long time ago a World Bank dam that would flood their rice lands. So there are many indigenous peoples throughout Asia. A problem is many governments don't want to recognize indigenous peoples from the Asia region, but they've done a lot of really important work to gain recognition and to gain respect. And the Philippines in 1997 passed an indigenous peoples law. So there is a lot of work in the region, and we could look at the different examples. I'll hand it over to the rest of the panel if they would like to add at all about definitions of indigenous or how indigenous are recognized.
Maybe you know better about the ASEAN countries who are now recognizing having a human rights body, and which will include also indigenous people's rights. About the definition, indigenous peoples didn't want to be defined because they always have been defined by others. So they didn't want to be defined also as a right to self-determination, which is to be able to say, everybody should be able to say we are indigenous or we are not indigenous. We cannot tell somebody is indigenous or not. Now, there are several features which are common among them all around the world, and this is what I think a little miracle of the UN, even if I am not always convinced on what the UN does. But the small miracle is that the indigenous peoples all around the world saw that they had common features. And these features is the tie to the land, which is very deep, which is spiritual, which is not just for eating or for building houses, which is far more than that. It's spiritual. There is the fact that they have been denied their rights. They have been, in French, I like to do that, I don't know if you can translate that. They have been put dans les oubliettes de l'histoire. It's exactly what she said. They were not recognized. They are put anywhere.
Yeah.
Forgotten of history.
The
forgotten history. And what she said is exactly the same in Canada, in Brazil, everywhere. They don't want to recognize indigenous peoples. I lived that myself. Being in Canada, I saw how Canadians, when I, as a European, understood that indigenous peoples were very lively, in French part of Canada, and I was working with French Canadians for having their language be recognized. But after I saw they were not recognizing indigenous peoples in their same territory. So this is really a very important problem. Another feature they have is they cannot take part to the government or to the political life. They have another system, and at any rate, this system is not recognized. Finally, they kept all or part of their culture, and they are determined to continue this culture and to pass it on to the youth generation.
Right. So that's a good point. Yes, the ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and they have a 10-nation body, and they just created an ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. So indigenous peoples are using that, and I think Chris might want to add something as well.
Hi, this is Chris. I'm from the United Nations Association chapter in Honolulu. Thank you for having me here. I just wanted to make a small comment, because what I found really interesting in just the clip of Bridge to the Future, and I look forward to watching the entire film, is right at the very end, the speaker had mentioned what is self-determination, because I think it's important for us to understand that it's not only one thing. There's a whole variety, a whole scale of possibilities in terms of what self-determination is. It's not just secession or independence, but engaging indigenous peoples in a process in which they can decide their own future. So it's not just the one thing where people think it's just independence. So I thought that was really interesting and cool that they highlighted that fact. And it also brought me back to our January session when we talked about what is indigenous people. And then sometimes, one of the speaker was from Taiwan, and she said, there are some people who claim to be indigenous people, but then don't have any of the features that you had just mentioned. So it's very interesting to see who are those claiming to be indigenous but have no relationship, and also, it's just something interesting to bring up. Thank you.
She should I have a question. What happened in Okinawa is Japanese settlers came to Okinawa. They started saying, we are Okinawan. This is happening. I don't know. Maybe Hawaiian as well.
Most people don't say it. The closest thing people do when they come to Hawaii is they say maybe they're Hawaiian at heart. But most people, of course, it's very clear if someone's a settler and who is and who is not.
Okay.
Since Cook came, it's clearly a settler, and the indigenous are the people who have inhabited the islands. So it's more clear. And for the Japan and Okinawa, maybe there's different times of patterns of migration. I know we have both Japanese and Okinawa here in Hawaii
I know.
for a very long time. And so we've all lived together in that way, but no Japanese people come and then say they're Hawaiian. So maybe it's unique that they come to Okinawa but say they're Okinawan. But I don't know too many people that would come here from Japan and then say they're Kanaka Maoli. So I'm not sure on that. I know we have just a minute and a half more. If there's any concluding comments or anything that someone wanted to say on Hilo, or if that was an okay answer for West Oahu.
Could I ask Chris, what is your email, Chris? I'd like to, be in contact with you, being that we're the chapter here in Hilo and you're the one in Honolulu. Did you hear me?
Yes. So our email address, UNA, it's on the website, unausahawaii.org. But then my email my email, this is gonna go, we're gonna upload this and it's gonna go onto the web. So can I just
I'll
email
send
it
it
to
to
Josh?
you.
Oh, okay.
Because Chris and I work together
Josh.
here on the chapter all the time, and we'll be working together
Josh,
on the
send it to me.
UN Sustainable Development Goals talk in November as well, since we know that theme. But we have 15 seconds left, so I just wanted to thank everyone for participating. I'd like to thank both of our speakers for taking time and sharing with the people in Hawaii. about this important issue, and we'll share more about the developments at the UN that take place in September as well as October. Aloha, mahalo.